Okay, Madam Chair, we are now live. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So it's 1:04 and I'll call this meeting of the Climate Action Committee to order. We do have a quorum. Looking at the agenda, are there any additions or changes to the agenda? I'm seeing heads shaking, so I guess a motion to approve the agenda as is. Anyone able to make that motion? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Carlton, and all in favor? Thank you, that's approved. Just a reminder about declaring any pecuniary interest at this time or at any time throughout the meeting. And then moving down to item 4.1, which are the minutes of our previous meeting dated May 21st. And I would just ask if there's any discussion on those minutes, and if not, I'll ask for someone to move that they be approved. Any comments or questions or concerns about the minutes? None? Okay, I think I see Luke's hand up making that motion. All in favor to approve the minutes of the May 21st meeting? And that's approved, I think. I saw 3 hands up.
I think Danuta is frozen. At least she is on my computer.
Nope, she's good to go here. We see her waving her hand about, and that is also approved. Thank you. I don't see anything listed under delegations or correspondence or staff reports. I'm assuming there is nothing to address within the public question period, but I will defer to staff, and Brittany is saying no. Thank you. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. The committee work plan, I believe, has been updated, and I wonder if Luke wouldn't mind giving us an update on that work.
Sure, thank you. Not much has changed. I believe I changed some dates and pushed out some dates at the request the CEO because of pending. I think there was pushed out a few decisions with regards to onboarding of the climate action coordinator. Nothing major. And the takeaway from the last meeting was that we would take another crack at the committee work plan once we have the coordinator on board and the consultant is being onboarded, and then they will provide some input to our committee, hopefully, in terms of saying what are the priority areas and how do we make sure that we align the mitigation agenda with the adaptation agenda. So just minor tweaks, nothing major. Hopefully deferred for maybe not next meeting, but maybe the August meeting. That's all from my side.
Any questions or comments for Luke on the work plan, the committee work plan? I just had one, Luke, and that's in the first paragraph. We referred to this as the Climate Change Action Committee. I guess for precision, we would change that to the Climate Action Committee, but that's not really a big deal. If there are no other comments or questions, I don't believe there's a motion associated with that particular item. Lost Brittany.
No, there is not.
Okay. Thank you.
And I will make that. Thanks for that suggestion. I'll make that change.
Thank you. And I imagine we're still getting requests from other municipalities to check out that work plan. Is it something that I believe I asked this in the past, Brittany, you may have to remind me, but it's available to folks to see via the minutes and the agenda packages. Are we inclined to put that on our website as a more direct link for folks to look at, or is it still too early to do that? I'm just thinking of requests from other municipalities. I had a request from a community member who's on a climate action committee in a neighboring municipality who emailed me and was having trouble finding it, and then so did I. But of course, realizing that you have to look back through the minutes and find the attachment there. Is there any value in putting that work plan on the website? How do folks feel about that, or is that preemptive? Danuta?
I just think people would realize it's a work in progress, but that probably should be stated. But as yeah, it's a good idea, I think.
Would that be onerous for staff, Al or Brittany, if we were to put that link there and then have to make sure that the updated version is continually uploaded to that?
Brittany, I'll take a stab first, but from my perspective, I don't think it's onerous at all. But what I would recommend is really getting the climate action coordinator on board, really having he or she review that work plan, the timelines that are associated with it, and then at that point have that posted, because then it becomes a living, breathing document for that individual whose responsibility will be to make sure that it's updated, that it's current, that it makes a lot of sense. So if the committee is agreeable to it, I would really recommend that we wait until that person comes on board, and I'll have an update in terms of a timeline for that in the next segment. And then at that point in time, we put something up and load it up live so that anyone who's looking for that information could easily access it.
Is everyone okay with that recommendation? Sounds like that's a go. Okay, thank you for that, Al. And then moving, is there anything to discuss regarding the appendix to the work plan? Are there any suggestions there, or is that okay as is? Luke? Oh, your hand's up, and I'm not sure if it's in response to this question or.
Yeah, it was more about, I agree to kind of allow the coordinator to take a stab at it. At the same time, if it's useful for any other individual to be who is part of a climate action team to see what we have, of course we could take the logo off, and then I'd be happy to share it as a non-official document, and to say this is where we're at the moment. You know, this is a living document. It will be developed and will be revised, but this is what if it's useful, then we could do that and just share it as an FYI basically, and take the logo off so that it is there's no exposure that way.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I don't even know if we need to remove the logo, though. It is a document of this committee as such. So I think sharing it informally the way it is likely just fine, but not, as Al says, not putting it onto the website just yet until our new coordinator has a chance to acclimate to the committee's work so far. Okay, so moving on then, if we can, to 9.2, which is a verbal update from our CAO. So I'll turn it over to you, Al.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Coburn. A couple of things, and just very quickly, you'll hear tomorrow that there's a green municipal funding announcement that's scheduled to be announced at 1 p.m. Really much ado about nothing. This funding's already been allocated and we're all aware of it. In fact, we started to spend money, but you'll hear tomorrow at 1 o'clock that the Township of Georgian Bluffs, in combination with a bunch of other townships, received some municipal funding, and specifically the Township of Georgian Bluffs, it will be announced tomorrow, is receiving $71,800 in funding to assess opportunities to retrofit and upgrade the biodigester. The project aims to, increase on-site renewable energy production, generation, divert waste from landfill, and produce soil fertilizer. So We've used some of that money for the feasibility study that's coming to council shortly. So if you hear something tomorrow, it isn't new news. It's news that's announced. I think the provincial and federal governments are notorious for this, where they will announce different things 3 or 4 times and just try to get some additional political credit for things. So if you do hear something, it isn't new. It's something that we've already started to do. Just on that front in regards to the biodigester, so everyone realizes there is a board meeting that's scheduled for the biodigester next week. And part of what was on that, will be on that agenda, is a study that will be coming back in regards to the possibility of mothballing the facility. So right now, and I just had some discussions with the CAO of Chatsworth today as well, the recommendation will be that both respective councils and the board receive that study in terms of mothballing that for receipt, just receive the information, and that they will refer it back to their respective staff members to bring a report back at a later date. Specifically, the reason why we don't want the board to deal with that mothballing report just yet is we should really wait. A second study, which is the subject of that green announcement that's coming forward tomorrow, is a feasibility study on the biodigester, and what does that look like from a Georgian Bluffs perspective, and the entirety of that operation. What's the feasibility of it? What are some things that we can do to make it a little more viable? And so that report is scheduled to come back to the council at Georgian Bluffs in the first week in July. And what will likely happen is that feasibility study will first come to our council in closed session, so we can review it, really understand it, because there's some confidentiality around that. And then we will likely, depending on direction from council, will likely release a portion of that or a watered down portion in public so that we can talk about that. But the idea is we really want to understand what that feasibility study looks like first before we contemplate the next steps on the future of the biodigester. So a couple of good things happening there on the environmental front. The other thing that I want to give an update on is the Climate Action Coordinator. We have blocked July 7th as the tentative date for interviews, for first round interviews for selected candidates. So we are in the process of receiving all of those resumes and interest, and we're hoping that we will have some qualified folks. What we're hoping is that that first round of interviews on July 7th with the committee. So Georgian Bluffs now has a committee on interviews. HR is involved in every interview. You have the direct supervisor involved in those interviews, and then you have one additional person. There's declarations that need to be signed now in terms of making sure that there isn't any conflict of interest, that there isn't any relationship. So there's an entire process that we follow now from a recruitment perspective that we'll be following for the Climate Action Coordinator. And then what I'm hoping is that coming out of that one day of interviews, that the committee, the hiring committee, has a recommendation for a selected individual. And then what we would like to do is set up a meeting so that this committee can then have an opportunity to meet that individual, understand some of their qualifications, and then you can have some input into whether or not that would be a wise choice for the township to follow or not. So we're just putting all that in place now. So you'll hear a little more on that via email shortly on the next steps and what we're going to be doing with that. In terms of the RFP, we had to have some preliminary discussion with some of the other CAOs in the county in regards to an opportunity to collectively go out with an RFP. I will tell you that the take-up has been very slow. There hasn't been much interest. There's been one CAO that's had a little bit of interest, but the reality is that they're all sort of dealing with priorities right now, COVID notwithstanding, and that they're all trying to identify, and we're all trying to get to a point where the reality is we all have to be at the same point in time to move forward with an RFP. And I think we are in advance of some of the other neighboring municipalities and where they are on their journey in regards to climate. So this will be one of the things that the Climate Action Coordinator will be top of mind in regards to getting that RFP out there. I will continue the negotiations and sort of the discussions with some of our fellow CAOs and attempt to see whether or not there's an opportunity for us to go out there collectively. But I think we're going to get to the point where we're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not we continue to delay our RFP or if we move forward with that. But I'm hoping that the Climate Action Coordinator will have some insight onto that and whether there's some opportunities for us to move forward or wait. So we'll get to that hopefully by the second week of July or third week of July. And then the other thing is that we are, as staff, looking into an opportunity, and you're going to hear that with the next agenda item as well, but we are looking for opportunities where we're likely going to third party and bring a report forward to council and ask for council's direction in regards to getting a third party involved in mining of all available grants for the township. So we currently don't have anyone on staff that has the bandwidth. When grant opportunities come up, it's kind of, who's got some time to put in a submission and try to see whether or not we would qualify. What we're looking for is getting council direction on the opportunity to hire a third-party consulting firm whose sole responsibility is to apply for all grants that are out there. What we're trying to do is structure an agreement where they would get paid a percentage of whatever we get. So they could apply to 100 different grants. If we don't get anything, we don't pay them anything. However, if we are successful and we get grants, we would give them a portion of that grant total that we would get. And we are hoping that would result in quite a few opportunities for us to get additional funding from various levels of government and other utility companies that are out there. And front and center would be a lot of things on the climate action front as well, where we can get some additional grants to move some of the low-hanging fruit forward, but also make a sizable dent in some of our work plan priorities and actually demonstrate to our residents that we're doing a lot of good things on the climate action front.
Thanks, Al. I don't want to interrupt if you're still, or is that the end of the
That's
report?
it, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. I wonder, I see some hands up and I also have a couple of questions. I wonder if we can do it chronologically, break it down according to what you spoke about, Al. So the first topic was the biodigester and receiving the feasibility study as well as the mothballing study that's forthcoming. Were there any questions? Just wave your hand in the air if that's one of the ones you want to ask about. Okay, Anne, you go ahead.
Yeah, my question around the biodigester is my recall of the draft climate action plan for Grey County did talk about the use of a biodigester to deal with septic waste and that kind of thing. And I wonder if the feasibility study includes a more regional usage of the biodigester or if it's really just focused on Georgian Bluffs.
Through you, Councillor Tan, I would say the following, that if the biodigester is to become economically viable, and if it's going to do what I think we need it to do, the regional approach is the way to go. In fact, I think the consultant that's putting together the feasibility study has talked about opportunities to bring in that supply that we need to keep that biodigester going. And I don't think it would be restricted to Georgian Bluffs at all. I don't think there's enough capacity or enough sort of demand and supply that would keep it economically viable if we just restrict it to our geographical area. I think the more we can expand, the more we can bring in materials, the more chance of us having an opportunity to make that economically viable. And I think the consultant will talk about that and talk about potential to bring in partners and bring in some steady supply of things that will make that a going concern.
Does that answer your question, Anne? Yeah, perfect. Any other questions about the biodigester? I just had one, Al, if you don't mind. You talked about monies being received, or the announcement regarding monies being received from the government tomorrow, and you mentioned it being for upgrades. When I hear that, I worry that it almost sounds like we're putting the cart before the horse, because we have a feasibility study and we have a possible mothballing study, and yet we've applied for monies to update the biodigester. Am I misunderstanding that? Obviously, we wouldn't be spending money to update it until we decide what the future of the biodigester would look like. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor. So the announcement tomorrow, which we already knew, and we actually used the money to pay for the feasibility study. It's not constrictive to only upgrading or retrofitting it. So part of what we've used the funding for is to look at that feasibility study, and then depending on the direction of council, then we'll look at whether we're going to be looking at retrofitting or upgrading it. That decision has not been made, and it's going to rely on the decision of council first. So that's the way the province is announcing it, and that's the way sort of the verbiage is. But we're not saving that money simply for the retrofit or upgrading of the facility. We've been using it for the actual study costs.
Okay, that's good to hear, and I'm glad that's clarified. I wonder at the general public hearing that and then wondering why we've applied for money for an upgrade when we haven't even received the feasibility studies yet. So hopefully we can get that word out there and make sure we're clear on that. I don't think there were any other questions regarding the biodigester, so I'll move to the second update that Al provided, and that's the hiring process for the climate action coordinator for our township. Were there any questions regarding that update? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so then the remaining questions must be regarding the hiring of the third party for the grant mining and possibly some of that grant, those grant opportunities coming towards the work of this council and climate action. So we'll go to you, Danuta, if you don't mind.
Sorry, I thought better of my
Oh, sorry, I think you're muted, Danuta. I didn't hear that. Sorry.
I'm trying to unmute. Anne had her hand up and I've withdrawn mine.
Okay, thank you. Anne, over to you.
Yeah, I've had a bit of experience with third-party grant mining, and I think it's a really good idea. The one caution that I would put in there is that it's really, really important for the third-party people that are actually writing the grant to communicate fairly well with the department that will be actually using the grant, so that it really matches the needs that are there, and that it is more kind of pertinent. So that's just something to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments for the CAO in terms of staff updates? Looks like there aren't. So thank you for that, Al. That's helpful. And then we have 9.3, which was to be John Anderson's recently developed tree planting document. So I was counting on John being here actually. So I'm looking at the committee's direction in terms of how you want to proceed. Do you want to wait until John's around to discuss that document, or shall we decide how we want, or some recommendations as to how we might use that tool as a committee? Anne?
Yeah, I think the committee could talk a little bit about using the tool, because it was actually at the request of the committee at our last meeting that John do this. And I know he's put a huge amount of work into it and consulted with a variety of people. And I know Bob Gray also kind of joined in to make sure that the I guess the stats, the little trees to big trees ratio and all of that was accurate. And I think it came out of a concern around council members not being aware that cutting down a big tree and replacing it with one little tree wasn't actually equal. So it came out to try to find a tool to help educate council members around the whole issue of trees and carbon sequestration. So I think the next step, we've got the document, the next step is to talk about how to use that document.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anne. I think, as you say, there has been a lot of work go into that and a lot of rewrites as well. And yeah, I do think that I can only speak for myself, but I do think that as a counselor, sometimes we're lulled into the false belief that if we plant a few saplings, we're really making up for lost opportunities if mature trees are cut down. And similarly, I wonder if we're lulled into thinking that taking money in lieu of green space when there's a development is also appropriate, as opposed to ensuring that there's green space built into a development. So I can only speak for myself. Again, I know I have lots of learning to do, and I learned lots from John's document. And I wonder if I could ask our deputy mayor how you feel that information might be received by council. Do you think that that would be a useful tool at that table, or how do you see us perhaps using that?
I guess I wasn't thinking of it being just for the rest of council. I was seeing that as being a document to share with council and with the public, that I think it's got far more value going out to everyone, and perhaps having it on our website as part of the Climate Action Committee reports. So I think there's a lot of value in using it all the way around. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I agree. I think the intent was to share it a little more widely. This may just be me, but I like to see references listed on any kind of technical document like that. It's because my background is science. I always look for a list of references. And so that would be the only thing that perhaps is missing. And I'm hesitant to ask John to put any more work into this, but in this day and age where we're accessing information from all kinds of sources, I know that people are savvy, and the first thing they want to know is, well, where did you get that information? Because this resource says this, or and so I think it's important for us to always take kind of an evidence-based approach to these things, especially if we're putting out specific data, like the number of trees and the percentage of carbon sequestration and that kind of thing. So that would be my only suggestion, and not that it has to be part of the document, but for example, if we were putting it on our website, we might in some electronic way indicate what the sources of information were that informed that document. Any other comments or suggestions? Luke?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for John, but he is, I think, very much on the same page as you in terms of, you know, scientists, the documentation. And I, as you recall, he changed the document because he got new pieces of information. So I think in order to give it the credibility it deserves, I think my sense is that he will be very willing to meet that request, and I think it strengthened the document and therefore strengthened the credibility and hopefully the usefulness. So I think that's a very good suggestion.
Okay, and Danuta, over to you.
This might be my own ignorance, but what about the ownership of this document? Whose is it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because John developed it and produced it. I think he likely has, I don't know what you would call it, first right of refusal or whatever. But I think that's probably a conversation we need to have with John. But certainly he can. I think he asked us about that. Did we want all of our names on it because we all contributed? And I think my comment was, my minor editorial suggestions do not warrant having my name as first or last author in this publication for sure. So I'm quite happy for him to take ownership of that since he did the work. I don't know how the rest of you folks feel, with the understanding that he's sharing it sort of freely with us to distribute to a wider audience. And
Yes, when Danuta mentioned ownership, I wasn't thinking that you meant so much who wrote it, because I think he's the primary author. I was thinking more about who gets to decide how this is getting distributed. And I know that the original purpose was for council. I don't know whether it was discussed with John about putting it on the website. I know that there's been a little bit of discussion informally about using some of the content for one of the GB Cat articles to the newspaper, but that was kind of, when that was discussed, it was based on whether John was okay with that. So I do think that as we kind of talk about distribution, past what the original plan was for it, that we need his input.
I agree. I would love to see the Georgian Bluffs logo put on this as part of our larger portfolio for leading the way in municipal climate change. But and I get the sense that John is pretty flexible about such things. But you're right, we should have that conversation with him. Is that something we would ask staff to do, Brittany or whoever on our behalf, is have that conversation with John, or should it come back to the committee? Anne, I guess, yeah.
I can have that conversation with John and then share it with the committee.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
I do think it needs some kind of authorship on it, and you can talk to him about the resources, the resource list, and also, I don't know how we feel about having our logo on it from Georgian Bluffs, but that's perhaps another consideration as well. Over to you, Deputy Mayor Carlton.
Thank you. I'm just wondering as well about having it sent out with a future round of tax bills for information for everybody within the township. I wouldn't see trying to do that for the upcoming tax bills that are going out, but perhaps next winter when the interim ones go out. I think it would be good information for everybody in the township to get.
Yeah, I think so too. I wonder about the timing though, and again, putting that ahead of perhaps what our climate change or climate action coordinator might recommend. For me, and in increasing awareness about climate change, I always think that a more global sort of what is climate change, sort of the basics going out first, maybe before we start to talk about specifics like tree planting, but I could be wrong about that. Al?
Through you, Councillor. So I haven't seen the document yet, but I would recommend the following, that the item be deferred until the next committee meeting so that Mr. Anderson can have some input into how the document is used. I would caution in regards to putting a Georgian Bluffs logo on it yet. I think that's something that would imply it's been endorsed by our council, and it hasn't yet. And I go back to Councillor Coburn, your original comment in regards to verification of the information that's on there as well. I mean, not that I'm suggesting it isn't anything but accurate, but you want to just make sure that everything's there and the rightful credit is being given to those sources, so that we don't get ourselves into any trouble either in terms of putting some information out there that might be under dispute or that might not have some validity. Because I think if we're going to make traction on the climate file, we want to make sure that anything we put out there has been verified, it's solid, it can withstand any tests. So I haven't seen the document yet, so I'm not sure what it says, but I think the proper way to do this is defer this until our next meeting, have Mr. Anderson actually talk about it and sort of where he sees it going, and he can certainly share with us his sources of that information. And likely it's He's got a lot of it probably in between his ears because he seems to be very knowledgeable about it. But we can then validate that, and then we can bring it certainly forward to council and have council endorse that as something that we're prepared to support as a township.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a reasonable approach. And yeah, I mean, some of the information he used to develop that document came from discussions with members of Grey Salvo Conservation. But there are ways to cite even personal sources of information as well. Okay, so we'll defer that if we can. We'll get Brittany to add that to our next committee meeting. In the meantime, it sounds like Anne is going to have a conversation with John about some of these elements. And I see that Brittany's hand is up, so over to you, Brittany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of procedure that we do need a motion to defer, please. So if we could have someone to move that and then a vote.
I did that on purpose just to see if you were listening, Brittany. I think Danuta is making that motion. All in favor? All in favor of that motion to defer? I see 3 hands. Okay, thank you. That's approved. Thanks for that reminder, Brittany. Okay, if there's nothing more under unfinished business, and I don't believe there is, we'll move on to new business. And the first one, 10.1, being the Ontario Environment Fund, being used to deal with the Presqu'île Road shoreline erosion. And I'm not sure if this is, I see Steve has just appeared. So this is going to be yours, right, Steve? I'll turn it over to you.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee here. I just thought we'd bring this forward to you that we applied for some funding here through the grant process for some shore erosion restoration work to be completed on Presqu'île. There's 2 locations that we applied for. So we're just letting the committee know that we applied through this grant because there are 2 streams for it, and then hopefully that we get approved and we can proceed with the work.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you very much, Steve, for that update. Are there specifics regarding where that shoreline work is being done at Presqu'île?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, we are doing it in 2 locations. I'm just pulling up the locations here myself. They're between McIntosh Drive and Bayview Lane on Presqu'île Road. So there's 2 spots where they are slipping into Georgian Bay that we have to do some restoration work. We are going to be putting down riprap, filter cloth, and soiling and seeding as per the conservation's preferred spec for hydro seeding, so that we can do proper runoff and then try to save the road from not only falling in, but also protect the residents as well for potential flooding and stuff as well. So that water, if the water does hit up onto the shoreline, it isn't going across as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure the residents in that area are going to be happy to hear that news. They haven't already. Any other questions about that for Steve?
It's just so through Madam Councillor, Madam Chair, it's just an application. We haven't received a confirmation of funding yet.
And I just typed in my notes, funding applied for. Yeah, my brain is already counting the cash. Look at me go. Sorry.
Well, let's hope that's the truth. Let's hope that comes to pass.
Thank you for that correction. All right, and then the 10.2 committee discussion additions. Okay, so these are where Anne, is this where you had some items that were going to be discussed here? Was this regarding the PCP program membership? Brittany's going to help us out with this. Help us, Brittany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this was sent through Vice Chair Schneider, specifically additional items for discussion on the agenda. In response to your comments regarding the PCP membership, I did circulate that email to the committee yesterday, noting that we will pass a motion in July to formalize our membership. Until that point, this committee is welcome to request any resources through PCP as well as attend any webinars. Specifically, I did send out that link to the Milestone 1 webinar, given the discussions around this table recently and our ask to potentially look at what doing our own inventory would look like. They did recommend that this committee attend that webinar if that is the way we would like to move forward. If you are unable to attend on Thursday, there will be another recording in July, specifically July 29th. So if you're unable to make it on Thursday, there will be another opportunity. But in regards to the other options, yes, these were added by Vice Chair Schneider. I did receive an email from the Vice Chair indicating she had lost all of her visuals, therefore can only hear the committee. But Member Schneider, if you have anything to add, that is the end of my blurb.
Thank you, Brittany. No, that's excellent. So it's kind of FCM to offer to let us use their resources when we haven't officially joined in a membership. I have registered for the webinar for Thursday, acknowledging that this is certainly a knowledge gap for me as the Holy Missions inventory. So I am hoping to learn a little bit about that. Are there other folks from the committee who may be attending, or looks like Danuta and Anne? Sue's saying no. I imagine you don't have any time to fit in one more meeting in your week.
I have county council tomorrow and it looks like it's going to be a long one.
Gotcha. Okay, no worries. What about staff? Will there be any staff attending that webinar, Al or Brittany? No. Okay. All right, we'll do our best to sift through the information, and perhaps we can add that to the agenda for next time too, that we have a report brought back on that. Okay, great. Is there anything else under new business that I'm missing?
Madam Chair, if I may, there's other discussion items included in that per the committee's request. So if anyone has any discussion points to bring up under either of the 3 bullets, now would be the time to do so. Specifically, the website option that the committee wanted to discuss, a response and update regarding the climate action coordinator position in terms of reference for the consultant.
Right, and I see those 3 bullet points now. Thanks, Brittany. I've discovered that you have to double tap on that particular area in order to see all of them. So yeah, the first one then is the website option, the tax break options for land use. If one were to be shown to protecting sensitive areas, active and passive reforestation. So did you want to speak more to that point?
Sure, and actually I was thinking, Kathy, when you made the suggestion of looking at how to share the document that John wrote with constituents, that including the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program and the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program links would be a really good idea, because it gives a bit of a financial incentive to protect trees and the natural environment. But I also wondered whether those 2 links could be added to the climate action website, because I think Brittany had put in some things for homeowners and renovations and that kind of thing. This would be another tax incentive that would be helpful, but also would get people thinking in terms of positive climate action activities. And I have those links that I could forward to Brittany if the committee would like me to do that. If you want more information, I've got a bit more information that I could share if there's an interest in that.
Are those the Ministry of Ontario, those tax break
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah, so the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program is Ministry of Ontario, as is the managed forest. And for the conservation land tax, it's looking at any piece of land that is on your acreage that is 1/2 acre or larger. You can get up to 100% tax incentive if you commit to conserving that land. And it can be wetland, it can be forest, it can be escarpment, it can be a range of things. The managed forest tax incentive, you need to have almost 10 acres. And something that I thought it was related to just having some of your land reforested, so trees planted, but we have discovered that in addition to planting new trees, if you're allowing a natural regeneration, that is also deemed useful for the tax incentive.
Yeah, I think those are great links to add. I don't see any, I can't imagine us having any opposition to adding that to the website, but if anyone is opposed, please do speak up. Is there not also something offered more locally through our own conservation authority that has to, Sue, you may be able to answer this question, but has to do with planting so many trees on so many acres and being supplied with those saplings at a reduced rate? Is that a program that you're familiar with that's more local?
I have heard of that one. That would be through the forestry committee, I think, at Grey Sauble, and I haven't been on that one for quite a while. But there is definitely something where they will go out and plant the trees. And I think you do have to pay a certain amount for them, but then they provide the labor to actually get them planted, is my understanding. I could be wrong on that. I'm glad to hear about what Ann did say, though, because I have 28 acres here I'm letting go back to natural, so I can get a tax break now.
Yeah, that's really useful information. Ann, did you have more to add on that?
Yeah, what the Sauble Valley Conservation Authority does is they're part of I think it's the 50 million tree project that was provincial and now was taken over by the feds. And they will help kind of do the planting and all of that kind of thing. The other thing they will do is they will help kind of document your eligibility for the reforestation or the managed forest tax incentive plan. So you can't just kind of say, I'm in. You need somebody that is a forester to come and take a look at your property to make sure you're eligible. And the Conservation Authority staff will do that.
Thank you. That's helpful too. So I wonder if that's another link that we can provide on our website, as well as the ones that you have mentioned, Anne. So the committee's all in agreement that, do we need a motion to have that added to our website, those items, Brittany, or are we good to go?
A simple showing of hands to indicate all in favor would be preferential, please.
Okay, all in favor of putting those links on our website? That sounds good. That's approved. The second bullet point then was the response to the climate action coordinator position. Al did cover that in his update. One question that so the question is, how does the selection process work, and does the committee have any input into the hiring? So Al, during your update, you did refer to that, but I wasn't sure if you said we would be meeting the candidate after they're being hired, or before they're being offered the position, or how does that timing work? And does the committee have any say in the hiring of or qualifications of that person?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee. I mean, hiring of staff is not the responsibility of this committee, but I don't see us hiring a staff member without at least this committee having some input into the decision. So in an ideal world, the way I would envision this is the hiring committee will do those interviews, and then once we've decided on our preferential candidate, we will set up an additional sort of session where the committee can get to know the individual before we actually put out an offer letter. If there's anything from the committee that's sort of a glaring concern, if there's something that the committee has an issue with, we'll certainly take that into consideration. But the way we're envisioning this is we will do all of our first round interviews as a hiring staff will have their interviews done through the hiring committee. We will arrive at a preferential candidate. We will set up a second round of interview where the committee will actually have an opportunity to get to know the individual, ask some questions of that individual, get a comfort level with the individual. And then if we don't have any red flags or any concerns from this committee, then we will proceed with an offer letter to the individual that had been selected.
Any questions about that process? I guess I was going to ask if it's appropriate or at all for someone from this committee to actually be on that hiring subcommittee, or is that, do we have a policy that be staff only? I know I certainly wouldn't be prepared to be someone to represent the committee on that because I don't know enough about climate change to hire a consultant. But you mentioned that there would be an HR individual, Mr. CAO, and then I imagine the supervisor, I think you said, or the manager or director, and then one other. So who would the one other, who do you intend for that to be?
So through you, Madam Chair. So what we've done is our policy is that there's a hiring committee of 3. In every situation when we're hiring, it's going to be the hiring manager. In this case, for the climate action coordinator would be Stephen, that would be on there. Our HR manager also sits on that committee. And then there's 1/3 individual. In this particular case, that 3rd individual has been decided that it's me. So it'll be myself, Stephen, and Janet, our HR manager, who would do those preliminary rounds of interviews. And then once we select our preferred choice, we would then set up a meeting with that individual to have a sit down with this committee members, and you would have the opportunity then to do a bit of a Q&A session. We would set up some questions as well, and maybe everyone would have an opportunity to ask a question. But really, what we want to make sure is that that individual would be a good fit to work with this committee, because we see this committee working with that individual hand in hand, and we want to make sure that before we make a decision on who that individual would be, that this committee is comfortable working with that individual.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if your hand is newly raised or previously raised. Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Al, for that. Any other questions regarding that position? If not, we'll move on to Anne. I believe you may be able to speak to the 3rd bullet point there under new business, terms of reference for the consultant. Is that something you wish to speak to at this time?
I think actually that came from someone else on our committee, but at some point, we need to talk about the terms of reference for the consultant, and partially I think that needs to come once we know whether we can do the energy audit in-house or not. Because if we don't have the answer to that question, then we got a limited kind of picture of what the terms of reference need to look like.
Okay. Agreed. And Luke, your hand is raised also.
Yeah, kind of following up on the same question. So I'm just thinking about the timing. So I would imagine there is the onboarding of the climate action coordinator, and I would imagine that's probably around early September. I would say. I would imagine maybe that's wishful thinking, but with first and second rounds in July and maybe September, October, and I would imagine then the other factor that would influence in terms of reference is the uptake of the other municipalities to do some cost sharing. So are we just thinking about ballpark schedule? We're looking at 4th quarter probably for this consultant or the RFP to be drafted and going out. Is that kind of a fair estimate? September, October.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Luke, I suspect that that's probably a good estimate, but that's being conservative. We're going to really try to get as much done as we can during the summer season. So if our interviews with the Climate Action Coordinator are currently scheduled for July the 7th, we think, if we're able to decide on someone 2 or 3 weeks later, that person starts. So maybe before August, that person starts, and then that person first thing on the agenda is to really work on that RFP and get that out on the street and consult with all of our neighboring municipalities. So I would say maybe September, October for sure, as would be a timeline to get that out and get that going.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Sounds like a good timeline. Ambitious, but likely doable. Okay, anything else under new business? If not, I think we are down to notice of motion, which there are none that I'm aware of. Don't see any hands raised. There's no closed session. And then looking at a date for our next regular meeting. Are we looking at a month down the road? That takes us to the week, the second last week of July. Is that appropriate timing, or do we have much to discuss? Do you want to go? Well, we'll have likely some word back from our CAO regarding the hiring process at that time, I would think.
Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair, if I may, I was going to interrupt and ask. I'm not sure you've got enough for another committee meeting in terms of agenda items, but I do believe that if we could perhaps target an afternoon or a morning sometime after the 7th, assuming that we find someone on the 7th. I don't want to sort of lose that individual by having to wait 2 or 3 weeks for a second interview with this committee. So if we could perhaps target something in and around, the 8th or the 9th or the 10th of July for a couple of hours, just to have some time built into your schedules. Then depending on our success of those interviews on the 7th, maybe we could have that individual meet with the committee shortly thereafter and maybe spend an hour with the committee with the Q&A session, and so that we don't lose an opportunity to hire someone if we're successful enough in finding someone that's of interest to the township.
Sue.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we could aim for the 9th of July, because on the 8th I would be back on county council. Now, I don't have to be there, but if we were looking at lower numbers and needed quorum, it would be helpful. I could be there for sure on the 9th.
Yeah, no, I definitely think we should try to work around county council if we can. Does the 9th work for other folks? I know for me it's wide open, but so are all three of those dates suggested. Yeah, the 9th, I see Brittany nodding. So is that, would a morning or an afternoon time fit best with staff, do you think, that day? It's a Friday, so I'm assuming you don't want Friday afternoon.
So why don't, sorry, through you, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, why don't we block from 10 to 12, 10 in the morning till 12 noon on that 9th as a tentative sort of block for a potential interview or sort of a get to know session with the potential candidate. And I will let our HR know, and part of what we will do during the interviews is we will let people know that if they are selected, they'll likely be asked to come back on the 9th between 10 and 12 and make sure that can work and coordinate.
That sounds good to me, and I see heads nodding. I don't see anyone in objection to that time frame, so that's fantastic. And maybe we could put the word out there fairly soon to both Bob and John so that they can block that off on their calendars as well. Okay, good. So Friday, July 9th, 10 to 12, to be confirmed, but blocked off to meet that candidate. And I guess in the meantime, we can take some time to think about what questions we may want to ask. And I don't know if we want to work together on that as a sort of a subcommittee, or if we want to compile some questions later on, but we can certainly give that some thought as well.
Okay. Now, we haven't made any plans for the next committee meeting. Did we want to do that for sometime in August then?
Thank you, Al. That sounds like a good idea. We had been going with Friday mornings as our regular meeting time, or am I confused about that? Anne?
We actually at the last meeting switched to Tuesday because during the summer, I think Fridays is Bob's kayak group day.
Oh, okay. I did not register that at all. So is Tuesday afternoons then, or does it matter on Tuesdays? No. So the AMO conference is the 15th to the 18th, so that week is out, at least for me. How does the 10th look for folks? I know there's generally, is that when Inter-Township Fire Department meets? So if we did it in the morning on the 10th, is that too much? No, that's okay. All right, so why don't we say what works for staff then? 10 o'clock on Tuesday, August the 10th, or earlier? What do folks prefer?
For me, August the 10th, that morning, I'm completely booked. The 24th. So if it's the 10th, I can only make it from 12 to 2 or after 4. Otherwise, I'm fully booked already. We've got ITFD on that 10th as well at 2 o'clock.
What
and we've
about
got a police services board meeting in the afternoon as well.
right? So you're suggesting the 24th then in the morning? We have committee of adjustment that day if it's still a go.
24th, anytime between 12 noon and 4 p.m. works for me, or between 5 p.m., 12 to 5. The morning, I'm completely booked.
Sorry, you're talking about the 24th, Al?
Yes, yeah.
For some reason, I have PCP webinar 2 to 4 emissions meeting. Does that mean anything to anyone? Why is that on my calendar?
That's this Thursday.
It's the June.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong. No, that's not.
June
I thought it was for
24th.
Yeah.
August. Yeah. Okay, that's why I put it under the wrong month. Yikes. Erase this from the tape, Brittany, immediately. Okay, so there we go. So you said sometime between, sorry, what were the hours again for that date?
If it's the 24th, for me, between 12 noon and 5 p.m.
Okay, is 1 p.m. okay for folks that day? For our next regular committee meeting? So 1 o'clock on Tuesday, August 24th. Good. And hopefully that works out for the other two folks as well. Oh, I have 7 meetings this week and my head is spinning. Yeah, it's read till your eyes bleed kind of for me. All right, anything else? Anne, I see your hand is up. Is that a previous? No, okay. I guess, oh, go ahead, Anne. No. Okay, I think that takes us to the end of the meeting then, and if there isn't anything else, I would just ask, do we need a motion to adjourn? We do. Who can move that we adjourn the meeting then? Thank you, Danuta. And all in favor? Perfect. Thank you, folks. Thanks for putting up with me today. I feel a little discombobulated. I'll promise to do better next time.